You also called for, you opposed efforts to strengthen the protection of people in bankruptcy. This has been an issue that you've heard about before. Your son was working for the company at the same time. In retrospect, wasn't it inappropriate for someone like you in the middle of all this to have your son collecting money from this big credit card company while you were on the floor protecting its interest?
Absolutely not. My son graduated from Yale Law School. The starting salary on Wall Street is $140,000 a year if he went to a lawyer. Options he had. He came home to work for a bank. Surprise, surprise. Number one.
Call for a warning on predatory lending. You also called for, you opposed efforts to strengthen the protection of people in bankruptcy. This has been an issue that you've heard about before. Your son was working for the company at the same time. In retrospect, wasn't it inappropriate for someone like you in the middle of all this to have your son collecting money from this big credit card company while you were on the floor protecting its interest?
That answer is yes. That answer is yes. It's an issue of corruption. That answer is yes. Joe Biden pushing to hurt the American public, especially people who may have run into financial difficulties, and preventing those people from being able to file bankruptcy, even on things like school loans. Biden, while his son was working for those companies that was going to greatly benefit from that, his son was trading off of his name. Biden was in Congress pushing for the legislation. Issues of corruption, especially his family trading off his name, is not necessarily something that Joe Biden is unaccustomed to. So when I saw this article written by Zephyr Teachout, I think this was yesterday, right here. Middle class Joe has a corruption problem. It makes him a weak candidate. I thought, wow, Sanders is not fucking around anymore. Wow, that's strong. I like that. I mean, ultimately, Zephyr wrote the book, literally, in real terms, on corruption. So if there is anyone to make this case, it would be her. And just to point out, nothing in this article is false. Everything in this article is flat fact true. Let's be very clear. She makes the very basic point that Biden has throughout his history, his family has traded off of his name. Not just that, even this notion of the legislation that he was pushing, the campaign donations he was pushing or he was getting for it. She uses 3 examples, but she makes the point that you can do more. So right here, I just read a part of it. I don't want to read all of it. I'll put the article at the bottom so you guys can see it for yourself. But I want you to just see, nothing in this article is a smear. Everything in this article is true. Her point is Biden is a weaker candidate against Trump because corruption will take center stage in this election. And if it takes center stage in this election, the people will just look at it and say, all of them are corrupt, which effectively hurts your argument if you're going to make that argument that Donald Trump is one of the most corrupt presidents in history. I hope you get my point. If you're running in a campaign with Trump and you've been neutered and using this weapon that the guy is corrupt because of your own family's corruption or your own corruption, that weakens your case. It makes it that much more difficult for you to win as opposed to somebody else that can actually use that brick credibly. First, Biden's support over finance over working class Americans. His career was bankrolled by the credit card industry. He delivered for it by spearheading a bankruptcy bill that made it harder for Americans to reduce their debts and helped cause a financial crisis. He not only authored and voted for that bill, he split with Barack Obama and led the battle to vote down Democratic amendments. On health care, April 21, after Joe Biden announced, Biden went straight to a fundraiser co-hosted by the chief executive of a major health industry corporation. He refused to sign a pledge to reject money from the health insurance and pharma executives that continue to raise money for healthcare industry donors. His campaign is being bankrolled by a super PAC run by a healthcare lobbyist. Now, it is clear why they would back somebody like Joe Biden, because they don't want Medicare for all. Joe Biden is essentially saying, I am just going to be incrementalist. And they're like, yeah, we like that guy who's going to be incrementalist, so we're going to give him a ton of money. But let's just be very clear. Joe Biden knew in advance that the position that he was going to take, especially against the other candidates, regardless of what the American public wanted, was going to garner him this resource. Third, the climate change. Biden signed a pledge not to take money from the fossil fuel industry, then broke his promise. Right after a CNN town hall on climate change, he held a fundraiser hosted by the founder of a fossil fuel conglomerate. He is pushing climate policy that has gotten dismal reviews from several leading environmental groups. Everything in this is true. You're taking cash, and you're doing favors for the cash that you're taking. It is corruption. Whether you want to call it soft corruption, it's corruption. The woman wrote the book on it. It is perfectly fair and legit for her to make this very specific argument, saying that Joe Biden is a weaker candidate against Trump. You look at Joe Biden in his interview with Tom Brokaw, where Tom Brokaw, 20, 30 years ago, is even bringing this up. Joe Biden looks like a guy, has that look where he'll look you dead in the eye, you and him, in an elevator. Joe Biden cuts one, and with all the sincerity of a toilet, Joe Biden will look you in the eye and ask, was that you? That's this look. You see it in multiple times, either in the debates or when he's lying about Social Security or he's lying about his Iraq war vote and he doesn't necessarily want to back up his own record. All of these things are fair critiques. I thought, yeah, Sanders is not fucking around anymore. I made this point that electability needs to be one of these arguments, and pursuant to the electability argument is he is a weaker candidate. Sanders have been pushing this case, by the way. For example, this.
Joe Biden voted and helped lead the effort for the war in Iraq. Now, Joe Biden has been on the floor of the Senate talking about the need to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. Joe Biden voted for the disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and permanent normal trade relations with China, which cost us millions of jobs.
Now, Joe Biden doesn't want to answer for any of that. And when dealing with this, he brushes this off. Now, if the media was doing their job, everything Sanders said there was true. Everything Zephyr Teachout said in that article just so happened to be true. Joe Biden has been begging and screaming for an apology for attacks on Social Security, talking about Sanders' doctored video, never happened, and screaming for an apology for this stuff. Sanders obliges, and in the process throws Zephyr Teachout under the bus in doing so.
Zephyr is doing a great job for us, and she's a wonderful surrogate. But on this issue, I strongly disagree. Look, Joe Biden is a friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years. He's a very decent guy. And Joe and I have strong disagreements on a number of issues, and we'll argue those disagreements out. But it is absolutely not my view that Joe is corrupt in any way. And I'm sorry that op-ed appeared to me.
Yeah.
And they removed it from burn after reading also. That's a horrible response. That is an outright atrocious response. And I'm going to explain why that is an atrocious response. And I'm also going to explain what I think Sanders may be thinking about in making that atrocious, horrid response. Don't throw your surrogates under the bus. Don't do it. The other campaigns aren't going to do it. Don't do it. And this notion of apologizing for something that just so happens to be utterly and entirely true, don't do it. It does not look good on you, nor does it help you. If you want to apologize for making the Afghanistan war vote, fair enough. That's no issue. That's something that you might have said, okay, this was an incorrect vote. Barbara Lee got it right. No issue. You will get accolades for that. You will not get accolades. Not one additional person will vote for you for coming out, making this video, attacking Teachout for something that was absolutely flat fact true. They're not going to love you anymore for it. The people who love you don't like this. The people who hate you don't care. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal, Patreon. This content is brought to you by you because it is instantly demonetized in the way that YouTube operates. So we like to say even $1 helps. I didn't like this. I dramatically didn't like this. I sat perched on this side of the world watching what was taking place in the UK. If anybody has watched this channel, you know I follow UK politics. And it killed me to watch Jeremy Corbyn, somebody who I actually like, somebody who I think is a decent man, twist himself into knots, undermining people that to a fault, backed him, and twisting himself in the knots for people who would watch him sipping Earl Grey and eating scones as he lay gurgling in his own blood. You don't do that. That's not good politics. That's not even good strategy in order to do something like this. It's weak. And weakness is not necessarily something that's ever politically rewarded. It's just not. People would prefer somebody or would accept somebody who is strong and wrong as opposed to weak and potentially right. Catering to political actors that are assiduously trying and plotting your downfall is not something that would ever be rewarded. I've argued in recent weeks on whether or not the Sanders campaign was too moral to do the job. Now, what I mean by that is, you often hear me say Ned Stark's got his head chopped off, meaning this is politics. The goal of this is to win. It's a contest. It's a competitive event. Candidates take political actions, political castings, the things that they say, the things that they do, the messaging, the theory of the case, all of that stuff goes into play, but also in regards to tactics, in regards to how campaigns hit one another. It's all fair game. Biden, I've argued, has to be hit on three areas: electability, the African American vote, and electability, the African American vote. There was one more. Electability, the African American vote. Oh, and elderly. My point is, it's fine to have a good debate performance, but ultimately the argument and the theory of the case that you need to make is based on the trends where Joe Biden has the strongest support. Electability is one of those main arguments. Teachout's article hit directly to the issue of electability. I thought Sanders to some degree understood this when they shifted their messaging in gear, saying that Trump would eat Joe Biden's lunch. And by the way, I'm not the only one that thinks that. This is, believe it or not, Tucker Carlson. Listen to this.
So it's an interesting moment. Unlike almost all of what you hear these people yell at each other and at you, racism, sexism, those are legitimate criticisms, no matter what side you're on. So how did Joe Biden respond to this critique of his record? Well, he didn't bother to respond. Watch this.
Do you have any questions about Bernie Sanders' judgment on foreign policy?
You're not going to get me in a fight with Bernie.
Thank you. We're
Bernie's got enough baggage.
Yeah, squint, chuckle, dismiss it as immaterial. Bernie's got his own problems. In fact, Joe Biden has it exactly backward. Baggage? Sanders, in fact, has the least baggage of any Democrat in this race, believe it or not. He is the least beholden to his own party.
Now, his point is Biden has it backwards. Biden does have it backwards. And I know a lot of people are looking at this notion of electability, but electability in real terms, not in the mystical sense that people are floating in a bubble and they think their candidate, or they think Joe Biden is electable in a way they thought Hillary Clinton was inevitable. Well, they were wrong, clearly, as a flat fact to an infinite degree about Hillary Clinton, and I will make the point that they're wrong about Joe Biden. Whether or not a candidate is electable is not just entirely what you think. It has a lot to do with that candidate's weakness, its strengths, juxtaposed against the political terrain to which that person is running in. For example, the hurricane, when Obama was running against Mitt Romney, and there's this famous hug where he's hugging Chris Christie, and both of these guys, he's presidenting, he's governing, and well, that's beneficial to Christie in a blue state, but it's also beneficial to Obama to look that way based on the environmental circumstances of that hurricane. 9/11, the financial crash. Any of these things can change the environment to which, or the terrain to which the candidate runs. All of this runs in line with whether or not a candidate will be stronger and weaker, with kind of a combination of all this stuff. My point is very basic here. It is fair game for Teachout to make that argument. It is fair game for Sanders to make this point that he's weaker in the sense of electability. The last thing that Sanders should be doing is apologizing for something that is entirely fair game. Few points. One, the primaries are a competitive contest. The entire point of the primary is to discern which candidate would be the strongest to run in the general election. Meaning you're trying to determine whether or not your candidate has a glass jaw now. Because the moment that person gets into the general, all bets are off. They're stuck. And the last thing you want to end up with is another Hillary Clinton, a dumber version of Hillary Clinton that doesn't seem to be altogether there mentally, going up against Trump. Second point. you got no additional votes because of this. Meaning there is no person that looked at this and said, yeah, I'm going to vote for Sanders now because he apologized to Joe Biden. To make it even worse, you've inoculated Joe Biden for attacks on corruption that are legit attacks. Understand what I mean? You've inoculated him. You've essentially undercut the person who wrote the book on corruption that's making the point that says Joe Biden has a corruption problem. I don't care how you needed to say that. You could have made that. You could have danced between the raindrops. You're a politician. Say whatever you need to say, but however you need to say, it should not undermine and undercut your surrogate, even if you thought your surrogate might have went too far. It's just a failed strategy in general. And the last thing you want to do is inoculate Biden for something that he will get hit with in the general. Do you honestly believe that if Biden exceeds the general, that Trump won't bring this shit up? He'll be screaming, I'm draining the swamp, I'm draining the swamp. Biden is corrupt. Where's Hunter Biden? I suggest to Sanders that he looks at 10 minutes of Trump's campaign rally where he goes on a riff about where's Hunter Biden. All of it's true. All of it's true. How are you digging your own person for this? That is horrendous. I sat there and watched Jeremy Corbyn do the exact same thing, and Jeremy Corbyn failed miserably. And it was his own fault. Yes, all of those forces was going to be allied against him. But the weakness was the issue. The weakness was the issue. That's a severe problem. Even if you thought it went too far, that video went too far, meaning what you just did, gutting, teach out. Joe Biden has been screaming for an apology. Why? Not just on this, even on the Social Security stuff. He's been screaming for it in general. But again, that's political casting. He's not being a legit character. All of this, from the standpoint of Joe Biden, is A, to deflect from a record that is actually ghastly, that will be brought to fruition in the general election. I guarantee you, all of this stuff will be brought to fruition in the general election. Two, by screaming for an apology, you make it look as if you've been aggrieved in some way. I demand an apology. Why? For showing you your own record? For showing you videos when you were talking about cutting Social Security? For showing you videos like this with Tom Brokaw, where even Brokaw understood this looks massively corrupt. This looks massively corrupt. And third, and most important, is that from the standpoint of a frontrunner, meaning the person who's the frontrunner, the last thing they want to do is engage in these tactics. They don't want to get into these political fights. They want to, for the most part, coast. It's like a boxer that's winning on points who just kind of wants to, skate out of the round. All of this has to do with that. This notion of unity, don't attack me, bro, all of that has to do with that. The weaker candidate is at a disadvantage if the weaker candidate cannot make a clear contrast with essentially the frontrunner and bring up issues that will plague the frontrunner in the race. Meaning it is only to the detriment of Sanders to not make these type of criticisms. However you want to do it, it needs to be made. Joe Biden has exploitable baggage, and that exploitable baggage will be exploited either here in the primary, when you have an opportunity to get in somebody that will not have that baggage, or it will be exploited by Trump. And I guarantee you, they will not be pussyfooting around. They will not be dancing around the edges. They will be screaming at the height of his lungs that Joe Biden is missing something in his head. Joe Biden is utterly irrevocably corrupt. I'm making the point to you that whatever you think right here is too strong, it will be magnified by 1,000 times in the general. And if you do not believe, if you think that this is too rough now, then Joe Biden should not be. Meaning, he's not your friend. He's in this to take you out. And this political casting and screaming for an apology is all politics. The last thing you should be doing is abiding him on that very point. To be fair to Sanders, Sanders wills an authenticity. And he wills authenticity almost as a weapon. When they ask people who's most trusted on this or who's most trusted on that, oftentimes they will go to Sanders, be it environment, being all these things. Who do you think is more honest? They would go to Sanders. And you can make a case that a lot of that is because of videos, unfortunately, like this, where he would be the guy to say, okay, I think that's too far. Or he would be the guy to apologize. By just saying, and also, threats seem to loom larger than the actual implementation of an attack. What I mean by that is, something that looks as a threat to you, it's always hard to not entirely understand all of the context of a threat. And because as human beings, we're left in this thing of perpetually not knowing, well, we have no idea how that threat entirely would work and operate. He may look at this as it goes too far and it feeds into this notion of me being Trumpian in my attacks on the other Democrats. That can't be your concern, however. You're in a primary. The objective of this primary is to win. If you believe that this goes so far that it actually sets you back in that aim, fair enough. But I think you're alone in that assertion. It's also fair to Sanders to say that calling Biden corrupt in this way may complicate the election. Meaning, the last thing you want, if your name is Bernie Sanders, is Donald Trump putting out a tweet saying even Bernie Sanders thinks Joe Biden is corrupt. That would be utterly and entirely horrendous. So, like I said, however you needed to say this statement, you could have said this statement in a way that danced between the raindrops to inoculate you from those type of attacks with Trump, while simultaneously not undercutting your surrogate and not pulling back from this particular thing. Even if you wanted to say, look, I'm not saying Joe Biden is corrupt. What I am saying that Joe Biden has a record that is problematic and will be exploited by Trump. However you needed to say it, you're a politician, dance between the raindrops. My advice several months ago was to put video or put something out like this unattached to you. Now, think of, for example, when Clinton put out the video with Barack Obama being a Kenyan Muslim and then put her hands up and was like, I don't know what y'all talking about. I don't know what y'all talking about. The difference here, though, is that the video that you would have put out for Biden or the information you would have put out for Biden that Zephyr put out there would have been true. Meaning you haven't broken any of your rules in the sense of lying in a campaign or smearing a person in an untoward way. It would have been fair game. It would have been fair game. Either way, your team has to be on the same page. Don't make an attack if you're not willing to stay with the attack. If you're going to apologize for this, you might as well apologize for attacking them for Social Security and apologizing for attacking them for potentially cutting Social Security and apologizing to them for attacking them for his Iraq war votes. The thing is, you're in a competition. There are attacks that are absolutely and entirely legit and nothing Zephyr said was false. And yet you put a knife in her for Joe Biden. Think about what I'm saying here. You essentially put a knife in one of your surrogates for the opposition. Apologies only forwards their cause. And mark my words, this apology will be used against you. It would not be used to your betterment. It will come up at some point. Anytime something comes up with corruption or anything like that, it will come up. They may even use it from the standpoint of media saying Bernie Sanders apologized and then do a follow-up story on how your supporters or how you have been similar to Trump in the way that you've been willing to attack candidates. I'm telling you, this will not end up being to your benefit. If you run, they're going to chase you your whole life. And this, I'm sorry, is weak.
Absolutely not my view that Joe is corrupt in any way. And I'm sorry that op-ed appeared to me. Zephyr is doing a great job for us, and she's a wonderful surrogate. But on this issue, I strongly disagree. Look, Joe Biden is a friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years. He's a very decent guy. And Joe and I have strong disagreements on a number of issues, and we'll argue those disagreements out. But it is absolutely not my view that Joe is corrupt in any way.
I don't get it. One of your main arguments was this notion of the intellectual bankruptcy of the Democratic Party, the money and the influence of money in politics. Is the influence of money in politics corrupt or not? Yay or nay? And if the influence of money in politics is indeed corrupt, and you have somebody who's taking that money and doing those favors, he is literally the creature that you are on stage screaming about. When you're at your campaign rallies, screaming at the height of your lungs that this needs to be for the working class, that these oligarchs are buying politicians and everything else. That's fucking Joe Biden. That's Joe Biden. And for an article that ended up being flat fact true, you put a knife in your own person for. This is weak. Massively weak. That's weak. This is weaker than going out and supporting Clinton. At the very least, I entirely understood where you were coming from with that. This is just weak. Bad politics, Sanders. Bad politics. I don't doubt Sanders' political instincts. However, I do know he has an ideological base, and that ideological underpinning can get in his way. Darrell Levy, I would appeal to Nina Turner to get it through to Sanders. If he really wants to win, he has to call out Democrats' corruption as well. Yes. Yes. I mean, for fuck's sake, are you really... If you are arguing that politics has been corrupted by the influence of money, great. Agreed. You don't shut up about it. Every time somebody said it, always comes up. Agreed. The American public agrees. People get it. Joe Biden is just a creature of that system. And the person who wrote the book out on it, that just so happens to be on your team, calls it out. Why are you repudiating somebody who has your best interests and who's backing you to the hilt and hasn't lied, hasn't broken any of your rules of saying things that weren't true, and you still put a knife in her? If you are right, and corruption is indeed an issue in our politics, that is not limited to Republicans. And the people who are on that stage, especially Joe Biden, he is a creature of that culture. And the notion that you're going to back away from them and inoculate them on this very specific issue, yeah, that's horrible. Charles Cavan, this is kind of weakness. This kind of weakness is my only qualm with saying, same here. Arvina Kaur, oh, thank you. Kathy Lloyd. Thank you, Kathy Lloyd. Thank you. Bernie's throwing the fight. Surveillance state. Epstein didn't kill himself. I don't believe Epstein killed himself either. A lot of people don't believe that. Either he was given the space or there was somebody who went into that cell that kind of helped suicide him, if we're going to call it that. And Black 508, the whole premise is small dollar donations, for fuck's sake. Yes. The entire reason, God, that's a good point. The entire reason that you're bragging about small dollar donations is because it doesn't have the influence on the individual politician in politics. Joe Biden is the opposite. He is a creature of that culture. And you literally came out hitting one of your own surrogates for saying something that was flat fact true in defense of Joe Biden. I'm sorry, that is horrible politics. And it makes me question, are you being serious? And I know he's being serious, but there's an ideological problem. I keep saying, don't let your ideology get in the way. Meaning, ideology is a poor substitute for environment. And I often wonder why weakness is so endemic to lefties. I think it has a lot to do with empathy. I think it has a lot to do with, in this very specific case, threats and this kind of contemplative approach to politics. Fair enough. But this is wrong. And not just wrong, it is politically ass backwards. This is weak. Call it such. Like, share, subscribe.